every year we get huge blockbuster disasters that everyone talks about for a moment, like this one, and this one, and this one. And usually these are not movies that I partake in, because I try not to waste my time with movies that I know won't be good, unless it's some B horror flick that I'm watching drunk with friends. Until last month, when two insanely huge and ambitious projects came out, and these were projects that intrigued me in some morbid way that I just couldn't help myself to. Both movies being Joker 2 and Megalopolis. Joker 2 I technically watched this month, but that's besides the point. These two were movies that had me interested way before they even came out, so the reception alone would not have drove me away. You know, Joker 2 being this long-awaited sequel to the biggest rated R movie before Deadpool 3 that had musical segments featuring Lady Gaga, and Megalopolis being a work in progress spanning over decades of work and something truly ambitious that was marketed as something that we have never experienced prior. Both movies ended up becoming the biggest box office disasters and critical flops of the year. I went to see both in the best format I could at the time. Megalopolis I saw in IMAX, and Joker 2 I watched in Dolby Cinema, and I also watched in IMAX, which means I spent around $40, if I don't count watching Joker for a second time, to experience these abhorrent projects. And now I'm going to subject you to my opinion because my wallet is screaming at me. And, I feel like I need to do something productive with the trauma that I faced. In this video, we're going to be going into why I engaged with these projects in the first place, why they don't work, and how big of a disaster they ended up becoming. Megalopolis has been in the works since 1977, with a simple idea of a parallel between the fall of the Roman Republic and the future of the United States. Ever since then, Francis Ford Coppola's ambitious-ass project was stuck in development hell as ideas changed, studios refused to finance the film, and 9/11. I did some research to find out why 9/11 delayed the film and got a bunch of different stuff, but there was an interview where Coppola said I was ready to shoot the film in 2001, then there was 9/11, and I realized my vision of such a generous and friendly future world was shattered. I could not have made a film that talked about the goodness of the human being when there was terrorism, so I let it go. Since no studio or producer would put their money up for this insane project, Coppola spent $120 million of his own money from a wine business he started in order to fund his dream project. Because when it comes to filmmaking, there's always that dream film that we build our careers up to in order to make something as good as possible, the quote-unquote magnum opus. Coppola was hyping up this project like it would be a game-changing magnum opus in cinema. There was even this weird gimmick involving audience participation, and everyone was talking about how bizarre of a movie it was. Unfortunately for Coppola and the distribution company that put this movie into theaters, more and more information came out about how much of a disaster this movie was going to be. From lawsuits and drama involving sexual misconduct to purposely hiring controversial people, to early reactions and clips that showed that this movie is not what it seemed. Less of an ambitious project and more of an arrogant and pretentious take on the Catalanarian conspiracy. At the time of writing this, Megalopolis has even broke $10 million, making this one, if not the worst grossing blockbuster that costed over $100 million. I was still interested to see where it was all gonna go. I mean, there has to be something. I've been looking forward to this project throughout the whole year. At least give me something to marvel at. Either something that's so terrible that I'll remember it forever, or some hidden gem that was underrated. But there was nothing. It was just so bleh. I don't remember much of anything from that movie because it was just a bunch of rambles and scenes that don't connect in a way that they should. So many quotes and concepts of ideas that are never fully developed in an interesting way. I like the premise enough with the idea of a guy who can stop time and is trying to create a utopia in the city with obstacles of corrupted politics. You know, I love that concept, but it's just too imbalanced as a movie. It focuses on the concepts of ideas rather than what those ideas entail and mean. They don't really show the process of creating the utopia with his cool-ass ability, as we see it done like twice in the whole movie. The corrupted politics could have been interesting, but the writing is distractingly bad, and the editing and pacing made the movie disorienting to keep track of. The utopia itself is never thoroughly explained and is just shown at the end. We don't really see the progression of this utopia in a way that makes the ending feel satisfying, and there are just so many side pieces that don't add much to the overall experience to this film, and just feel like padding to an already packed runtime. The major thing this movie is lacking is focus. Like, no wonder nobody can grasp the meaning of what this movie even is, because there are points in this movie where I don't even think the director understands what the movie is about. You remember that one episode of Community where the dean makes a commercial and goes insane, bringing everyone else down with him, trying to make something that was quote-unquote impossible to make? Well, ironic, considering Francis Ford Coppola said in the production notes that, I had made so many different pictures in so many different styles because I like to make movies I don't know how to make. Because if you don't know how to make them, the movie starts telling you how to make it. And that's very exciting when you listen. Thanks to Carsten Rundquist for that wonderful quote that I found on this video, because it perfectly encapsulates the major problem of this movie. It feels like you gave some pretentious film student who knows a bunch of random philosophy $100 million to make a movie that, even though he has zero experience actually working on one, he decides to make it anyways. Did that analogy make any sense? I don't care, because that quote barely makes any sense. Here's a better explanation of how I feel about this movie. It feels like a stream of consciousness. Which sounds cool, but it's like if bro was on way too many mushrooms to come up with anything feasible, so then we end up with this mess, that kind of stream of consciousness. It's basically a movie that's made without the building blocks of what makes a movie good. A movie that has too much to say and doesn't know how to say any of it. We end up getting distracted on mixing so many different things that take away from the good stuff that is in here, because this movie has potential. Some scenes genuinely look great. The idea itself is intriguing and the acting is stellar at points, but none of that matters when the whole movie is an incoherent mess. Joker Folie, a sequel to, at the time, the biggest rated R movie of all time. Reason of that being so successful is due to the gimmick of a rated R movie about a comic book villain and a dark drama that pays homage to older cinema being an intriguing watch. It was far from perfect, and many people don't think this movie is good at all, but it's fun because of its gimmick. Now, what happens if we take all of that gimmick away and, try to come up with something kind of original? You get this heap of garbage. A movie that doesn't know why it exists, and hates that fact, and tries a different set of gimmicks to make itself stand out. People have said that this movie is just a recap of the first one. I'm not gonna not agree with it, but there's this redundancy feeling towards this whole movie, as there's no sense of progression or evolution within the story or the character of Arthur. It feels like the movie doesn't know where to go with his character, so they just restart his arc of depressed loner with mental health issues, until later where he develops that Joker personality again with the help of Lady Gaga. But except this time, the movie takes that away from him in one of the most insane ways possible. And if you've seen some of the memes, then you understand and know exactly what I'm talking about. Spoiler alert, doesn't fucking matter at this point, but there's just so much there's so many different ways you could have had him reflect on his past decisions than literally violating him physically. Oh yeah, and this movie is a musical, a musical that isn't very good. Imagine you have Lady Gaga in your musical and you put auto-tune on her voice. Auto-tune on Lady Gaga's voice. I don't care what you're doing, you never put autotune on someone with the voice of Lady Gaga, just because Joaquin Phoenix is a flat singer. That's dumb. I hate, God. Musical segments themselves don't even add much to the movie, except information that was already provided in some vague sense of how the characters feel at certain moments, because the musical aspect is nothing more than a gimmick to make the movie stand out, which is funny because it feels like they barely promoted that fact. The movie's marketing was trying to match that grandiose spectacle of the last movie, which is such a detest to the actual movie's content. This is way more of a sad, reflective, introspective take on his character and illustration of one's consequences on others. The bombasticness of this movie only exists in the musical segments and latter half of the courthouse scenes. Oh yeah, this movie is also part courtroom drama for whatever reason, and that's what people were talking about when they say that this movie is just a recap of previous events in the first movie, which I agree to at a certain extent. The courtroom scenes in this movie are just a recap of the previous stuff that happened in the first movie and how the characters in those movies were affected by Arthur's actions, which is an interesting idea that shines a couple of times, but it's all ruined by the fact that it takes way too much time to get here. At that point in the movie, I was just tired of the lack of anything that mattered in this movie. And all throughout, you can tell Todd Phillips just didn't really have the heart when making this movie. You could tell he probably didn't really want to make this movie, because there's hints of great filmmaking here, but there's just backhanded nature to it all. And it leads to this nothing of a plot meant to commentate on having too much of an influence that you don't want, aka commentary on the reception of the first movie, which you've heard from a lot of different people probably. I honestly believe you can get a good movie out of this, but Todd Phillips did it in the most pointless way possible. You know, a movie overall that goes nowhere, explores things that were already explored in the last movie. You know, it's a half-baked musical and courtroom drama that add nothing to a movie with nothing to say. Now it's time to get to the numbers. Joker 2 cost $190 million without counting marketing, which means this movie needs to make around $400 million in order to break even at the box office. It made this much, which I'm assuming is even close to how much it needs to make. I'm also assuming that the third Terrifier movie, which also features a clown, will make more money in its first weekend than Joker's second weekend, which is insane to me considering one costs way less than $200 million to make. Overall, I'm in pain. I think I learned a very valuable lesson on understanding my limits when it comes to movies I highly anticipate. Maybe I should listen to people when they say a movie sucks ass, because this was incredibly avoidable. The only thing that got me to watch these movies in the first place was my morbid curiosity I had in like why they were so bad in the first place. I mean, both movies had potential that both movies had potential that had so many people at least interested in the movie, but then everyone started hating on these movies. That alone should have been enough for me to just step back and accept that it's probably a bad movie rather than spend all the money that I could have used literally anywhere else. Well, anyways, it's a spooky month, so prepare for a spooky video at the end of the month. I just wanted to use this moment to talk about movies that I did not like. So, yeah, thanks for watching.